Hello everyone and welcome to a tutorial video for Terra Invicta. Amazing current strategy games from Pavonis Interactive and Hooded Horse, but a slightly complex one, and I get that if you start into this game you might be a bit overwhelmed with the choices, where to go and what to do, and I want to help you out a bit with this video, trying to help you finding the best nations with doing a top 10 list on where I think are the best 10 nations to start with and why they are. So let's jump in and let's start with number 10. This number 10 is down here. The lovely island nation of New Zealand. And the reason why I think New Zealand is so great is this little symbol over here. They have a space program from the get-go at the Mahia launch complex. And they are a place easy to take over nation. They also are next to Australia and can form an mega nation, or a smaller mega nation later on with Australia, relatively early on, so you can combine them pretty quickly, and then you have a space program already for this combination as well. And they are also far away from any bigger trouble. So if you want to have a nation that doesn't get attacked by the rest of the world too easily and too early on, this is a safe space. It's also pretty easy to take over as it is a full democracy, so not much going on here against you, and really a solid number 10. So yeah, let's move over to number 9. And number 9 is over here, Iran. Iran also has a space program already. Iran also is close to a nuke. Iran has 3 slots, which is still pretty low, relatively fast to take over. They have an army that you can command, though it's a pretty weak one. So against nations that also have an army, like Turkey or Israel or India or Pakistan, you don't really want to fight, but you can use it for expanding either into the Caucasus or into Iraq or up here into these if you want to. They have natural resources, so they get a good boost to economy if you want to get that done as well. Issue is, obviously, they have powerful rivals, so if you go for Iran, you might struggle to find an alliance with any of these. Syria is your ally, but that's not the strongest, so you might want to change their geopolitics quickly, or go for a different power bloc than Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the USA. So that's why I think they're number 9. A really strong nation, but not the best because the geopolitics are a bit annoying. But GDP is okay. Only 3 slots is fine. And yeah, the insurrection is something you have to get rid of as well if you start with this nation. Let's move on to the next one. And number 8 is India. India has already a nuclear arsenal. India already has a space program, but it's a small one, and they are a really big nation with some issues, so taking them over is not super easy. But once you got it, getting a nuclear arsenal is always powerful in this game. Having 3 armies already from the get-go is also strong. If you can boost their military up, you don't have to invest into armies anymore. Sadly, they don't have a navy, but maybe if you fund into military and navy, you can get these even to become a global force. Otherwise, they are for sure one of the strongest regional powers by a big margin. You could expand into Southeast Asia. If you want to risk it, you can fight Pakistan with its own nuclear arsenal on the other side. But you can also just focus on the space program, which you just got online. You have a good research output as well, so that puts you quite high. GDP-wise, one of the biggest nations on the planet, obviously. So a pretty strong one here as well. Just that you need to take over 5 slots is quite a lot, and with its more than 1 billion population, it's also not that easy to push into your direction early on. So one that you have to invest a bit more in, but you also get quite a bit out once you control them. So that's why I would say India is number 8. They also have solid relations to a lot of countries, and only China and Pakistan are obviously the big rivals here. So let's have a look at number 7. And at number 7, we have Germany. Germany is in the EU, so it gets some space boost out, but it doesn't have a space program just yet. The first couple of months or years in the game, most likely months, you will have to push them to finish their space program so that they finally get some boosts as well, so they start with 0 boost on their own. What they got though is at least 1 mission control and a good amount of research for a 4-slot nation. Army-wise, you would have to build some as well. Obviously, no nukes either, but they are really well situated in one of the strongest regions on the planet, within Europe. And they don't cost you more slot than their bigger than their neighbors in France or Britain, for example. But you don't get nukes for it. You just get a lot of potential with the GDP and with the research, which you then have to push into the direction you want to. So Germany is something you can push in the direction you want it to go, but it's not there at the beginning, and that's maybe its slight weakness. But once you get it, you can do a lot with it under your control. You can go military, and yeah, try to repeat history a 3rd time if you want to. You can push them towards a big spacefaring nation, a big science output, or just an all-around nation. They can do everything here. And the 1 mission control for sure is a nice on top of that. But yeah, a good starting nation, one of my top 10, just not specialized in anything, so that's a bit of a weakness in my eyes. So let's move on to number 6. And number 6 is over here. Japan is also similar to Germany, but slightly better in my eyes. As the only weakness it has is it's not in the EU, which also can be a strength though. Like, Japan doesn't really form a mega nation with anyone, but it's already a pretty powerful nation at the begin with, so controlling it on its own is, even in the late game, still pretty strong. Japan has a good army. Japan doesn't control an army at the beginning of the game, so it's in that similar to Germany, but it has a space program already. It has a mission control, and it has even more research output than the Germans, and a higher GDP. So they are a pretty powerful bunch as well. You also get a bit more economy centers with the Japanese than with the Germans. And they also can't get attacked as easily because they are an island nation, so meaning everyone who wants to come to them needs a navy, and that's not too many nations at the beginning of the game, so you're relatively safe out here. And you also have a powerful ally with the USA, China and North Korea and Russia as rivals, which is pretty standard for any Western democracy in this game. But yeah, absolute strong starting position here in my eyes, with the space program already online and not too small. Like, for the beginning, this is a relatively strong boost, and you can easily get that up into really high numbers really quickly. So if you want to go to space, Japan is a worthwhile consideration from the get-go, for sure. Though, let's go for a budget version of that with number 5. As number 5 is over here in the Middle East, and it's Israel. One of my favorite nations to start with, and the reason is it's such an all-rounder. It has, for a small nation, a decent research. It can do a lot with its education and getting more research and co. It has a good GDP per capita. It has an army that is really modern and outclasses every of their surrounding armies, like Turkey, Iran, and Egypt, all having weaker armies than other neighbors around them not having any. And they only have 2 slots that you need to control, plus they have a nuke. And they have a space program. So they have everything you need on a budget. Like, nothing here is amazing, but you can nuke if necessary. You have the potential to, if you put Israel within your power block, and you go to war, if the other side is a nuke nation as well, they have to fear you retaliating on top of them. So that is powerful. Israel has a guerrilla war, obviously. The situation in Israel geopolitically is not the most amazing. You have a lot of rivals, but you can appease them quite easily if you want to. So that is quite well done. And with the mission control and the boost online from the get-go, with a bit of investment, you can build the Tel Aviv spaceport out relatively quickly. It's also, compared to other Western nations, relatively close to the equator. So it boosts up pretty quickly there in that regard as well. India is, for example, further south, closer to the equator, but most of the other nations we talked about are further up north in the northern hemisphere or further up south with New Zealand. So the boost level that you get out of here is pretty good, and that's why I like Israel. It's just a pretty easy nation to take over, and it gives you a lot of utility for it. So that is why it is my number 5. Let's move on to number 4. Number 4 is Russia. Russia is powerful. Russia has a problem. It's it is at war, and it has a lot of rivals for it. As obviously the last couple of years in geopolitics were not the best for Russia, but it has a lot of resources. It even has a lot of, it has a lot of resources, and if you get it back in the geopolitical game, it can use that to get up in economy quite quickly once more. It has 3 there's 3 mission controls. It has 2 spaceports. Not the biggest, but 2 of them, which both do pretty well. The Vosny Kozodrome, the Yasny Kozodrome, and it can take over a couple of its neighbors relatively quickly, peacefully or in war. And it also has a good amount of slots. It only has 4 slots, so plus it has 30 nukes, the most nukes on the planet. So if you are Russia, other nuclear nations will have to be careful what to do about you. Their navy, not the strongest, but they at least have a navy. They at least can some of their, like one of their armies around the world later on. And yes, the monthly boost is really helpful. The research is on the lower end for such a big nation, but still is there in a significant amount. And it can be a good anchor for your geopolitical game. Absolutely worthwhile considering. The position, the unrest situation is something you have to get under control. The Ukraine war you have to either commit heavier or less to. I would recommend less, but that's up to you. And yeah, then you have to try to get these resources here all online. Actually, you have 3 Kozodromes. That's Kozodrome here as well. So Russia, a pretty strong nation if you get it back on course, and that is not too hard to do. Plus, yeah, the nuclear powers is really big potential for whatever you want to do with it. If you are playing one of the more aggressive factions, Russia for sure gives you a good launch pad for that. So let's move on to number 3. And number 3 is the USA. It's the most powerful nation on Earth, but it's also a pretty tough one to control. So it's something you have to start thinking over how you want to get it. The reason why I have the United States in, and we won't see China here, is that the United States is a democracy which still can be pushed somewhat into your favor. Though you will have to invest influence. You will have to invest money to push them. You shouldn't just go in there with the normal sway public missions. You should boost them up so that their potential is higher and that you do it quicker. But a way to go over it is taking Canada and or Mexico and then trying to get for the US. Though you have to be careful with the amount of control points you can get if that works out. And that is why USA is not number one. Like, obviously, if it goes to the power, it is number one, but it's 6 different levels to control. The good thing is every single one of them controls the army, and I think, yes, all of these armies also have a navy, so the US military you get access to relatively quickly. It's also the best military in the world, and it has 28 nukes. It has the best space boost here as well, and it has 6 mission controls, which is also number one. Plus, it obviously has also a lot of research. So once you get access to it, you get access to those parts as well, bit by bit, and you get a good margin even if you don't control the USA fully. So that's why I would say it's still really worthwhile to go into, and that it's absolutely fairly on my number 3 slot. But you have to plan it correctly. You can't just be like, oh yeah, I'm doing a bit US and then I'm doing a bit somewhere in Africa. If you go for the US early on, like, you should go all in on it. And it can be risky. If you have unlucky rolls, you might be left behind your competitors for a while who crop the rest of the world up for the while whilst you try to struggle to get a foot into the US. So be careful, but if you do it right, the US 100% can pay off. If you get control of it, it's so immensely powerful, and that obviously can be worth the risk. So let's move on to number 2. And number 2 might be a surprise to some of you, as number 2 is a small nation again, and that nation is Kazakhstan. Because Kazakhstan is under control of one of the biggest spaceports in the world, the Baikonur Cosmodrome, and that is so powerful, especially for a small nation like this, with only 2 control slots. The Baikonur Cosmodrome is so helpful. It also has natural resources, which can help you boosting the economy later on, as it is pretty helpful. In combination with Russia, you can also let it federate, like it already starts in the Eurasian Union, so you can unify it with Russia once more if you want to go for a Soviet Union revival tour. So if you take both, that can be pretty powerful. And yes, if you take this nation early, the amount of boost you get out of it is, for the investment you have to put in, is beaten by no other. So if you just want to go to space and you want to go there as fast as possible, Kazakhstan is your friend. All the other nations around, in the Eurasian Union, like Belarus, I think that's the 3 at the beginning, or no, Kyrgyzstan also profit a bit from the boost as well. So Belarus a bit more than Kyrgyzstan, as it is quite a bit bigger. So Belarus might be someone to, like, parasite of Kazakhstan as well, if you want to do something like that. But Kazakhstan itself is the one where you really get the boost, and I can only recommend that. Yeah, it even has a pretty advanced education level and so on. So Kazakhstan, I would say, if you want to go to space as early as possible, this should be the first nation to go for. You don't have a strong military, you just don't have a strong research, but the one strength you have is so immensely powerful for such a small nation. So, and it's one of the biggest parts of this game. Like, yes, we're talking about Earth right now, but the space part is where this game really gets intense. So Kazakhstan is your launchpad to that. So let's move on to my number 1 nation. And my number 1 nation sits in Europe, and it is France. And yes, France is having an army with a navy, so that's nice. France has some nukes. France has good research. France has a mission control. France has boost. And the most important thing is where France has boost, in my eyes, and the reason why it is top notch, and that is it has them over here in South America on the equator. And that combined with a nation with good GDP means that you can boost their boost so efficiently into higher numbers. Plus, you have an army in Europe that you can use to conquer either Europe, or you can do it the peaceful way by creating a European Union nation with maybe putting Italy, maybe putting the UK, maybe even putting Germany into it at the beginning, though going for both Germany and France most likely will overstretch your resources a bit, but maybe you take in Benelux, the Alpine states, or Italy into it. Italy's actually not the most efficient nation to go for, as they also take you 4 slots, but France is, maybe if you start out high, like for example the resistance does in this random seat, then you could go for Italy. Something you always have to consider, that yes, all of these guides are nice, but if your nation faction does have no entrance into a nation and some other nation is already big there, faction is already big there, you won't beat them for it most likely. So yes, France, if you can go for it, I would recommend, if you want to go for a power play, I can only recommend this nation. The strength is just so good. It has no big problems with its populace. It has good research. It has one of the easiest boosting, easiest to build up boost in the game. It has a mission control, and it's not as hard to take over as, for example, US, so, or China, or India, for that matter. So that's why I like France. Like, India has a similarly good positioned space port together in comparison, so that, but it's harder to take over, and it also doesn't have the position in Europe that France has. Like, this combination is unique, having a spaceport down here and having the main body of your country and your GDP in Western Europe. So that is quite nice. You can go with similar things with the Benelux, but they don't have a space system and so on at the beginning. But if you want to create a European Union nation as Germany, I would recommend, for example, taking over the Benelux. But that goes, and then using that as a spaceport down there. But that maybe goes a bit far, as, yeah, this was just a quick intro into my top 10 nations. Let me know down in the chat below if you agree with it, or if you have other nations on your top 10 list. Which nations would you go for first? And yeah, I hope I was helpful with this guide. If you think so, consider giving it a like so that more people can profit from it as well. And I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.